to have the speakers that we have today. Also, we just kind of have some magical timing around her when she's showing up here for us. So I'm going to introduce her as we get her mic'd up. So Aria is an award-winning advocate based in the San Francisco Bay Area. And as of a week ago, and I want a big round of applause for this, she is the new executive director of the TRANSGENDER District in San Francisco. I'm sure she'll say something about it, but you should definitely Google it. It is the first of its kind in the world. It's a huge thing that San Francisco activists have made this happen over the last many years. And now it's finally coming into reality. And Aria is the first full-time executive director, is that correct? Right. Which is a huge, huge thing. So very, very exciting. She also currently serves as senior policy advisor for the San Francisco Human Rights Commission, focusing on humanitarian efforts for LGBTQI violence prevention, transgender women of color, sex workers, and racial equity and equality. She's a policy fellow alum of the Women's Policy Institute of the Women's Foundation of California, and a Sojourner Truth Advocate Fellow alum of the Auburn Theological Seminary in New York City. Her advocacy efforts have been featured in numerous media platforms, and I could rattle them all off, but you can also just Google them. And I want to give you your time for this amazing presentation. So.
Hi, everyone. Oh no, we need to try that again, and I just want to make sure my mic is on. Hi, everyone. A little bit louder. It's lunchtime, so we could try that one more time. Hi, everyone. Hi. Is that the best we could do? Okay, one more time, please, just for me. Hi, everyone. Hi. There we go. My name is Aria Saeed. I'm so grateful to be here. And the topic that I thought we could talk about today is the paradox of transgender visibility. I think we're in a space in the world right now where everyone seems to be familiar about asking pronouns, which is an era of the movement that we've sort of built that we haven't always seen and hasn't always been a reality. And I want to talk about what transgender visibility does for the broader public and what it doesn't do for transgender people. And I think I just press. Awesome. So why listen to me? Dawn thinks I'm smart. I know some things. I am a Black woman of transgender experience. And I say that intentionally because I think oftentimes as trans people, our womanhood is sort of stripped from us, or manhood if you're a trans man. And it's important to sort of note the experience to your journey as well as your identity being the focal point and not your experience to it. And I am the self-proclaimed Black Carrie Bradshaw of San Francisco. Less important things, but as was mentioned, I am now the executive director of the world's first transgender district, the Compton's Transgender Cultural District, which I also co-founded, celebrating the Compton's cafeteria riots of 1966, and that particular urban area in the Tenderloin, which has been the residence of transgender people since the 1920s. And I started a project that I hold near and dear to my heart called Queen Culture Initiative, which is about the social, political, and cultural empowerment of Black transgender women. And I also co-created or consulted on 10 different local and state laws and policies being replicated across the country. Famously worked on SB 179, which many people are seeing in the news, allows Californians to identify as non-binary on their DMV, and also removes the physician attestation for gender identity with the California Superior Court. I've worked on other policies that allow transgender people to change their name and gender while incarcerated, and also wrote the country's first law protecting sex workers in the United States. Again, those are not as important. So just a snapshot, and forgive me if I stumble a little bit. This is actually the first time that I'm talking about this specific topic, which I was so juiced about before coming here, but I don't have it like at the tip of my tongue, so just want to ask for your forgiveness in advance. But for those who don't know, transgender is a term that we use to describe people whose gender identity differs from their sex assigned at birth. Your gender identity is your internal personal sense of being a man or a woman or non-binary. For some people, their gender identity does not fit neatly into those two choices. And something that's interesting to note, in American culture today, 1 in 4 Americans knows someone who is transgender personally. However, we're probably one of the smallest populations in the United States in particular. So 0.06% of Americans identify as transgender, meaning that there's perhaps 700,000 transgender American citizens. And as we can see here, this is the beauty of transgender visibility that we've been able to see, with Laverne Cox covering Time magazine, most famously the transgender tipping point. Caitlyn Jenner, how many people, raise your hand if you know who Caitlyn Jenner is? Caitlyn Jenner, I think, is a complicated trans icon in this particular way, because what she did do is she, with the brand of the Kardashians, everyone in the world knows who Kim Kardashian or Kylie Jenner and all those girls. Someone knows them from television, from products, and she introduced the conversation to every American home as well as every home around the world in a way that perhaps Janet Mock or Laverne Cox could not. Up in the middle at the top is a clip from Paris is Burning. How many people know Paris is Burning? Really? Not that many people. Has anyone seen Voguing? Anyone know Big Frida? Okay. Paris is Burning. We'll talk about that later. But first, I want to play a clip on sort of transgender people throughout film that we know, if that's okay. Any particular, all right. Any particular thoughts that come up for folks as they watch that clip? Yeah?
Well, my first thought was, there's a lot of cis people playing trans people.
Thank you.
Can you just repeat it?
So the statement was, there are a lot of cisgender people playing transgender people in that particular clip. Any other thoughts that came out for folks? Something I want to point out is that I think there is, can someone turn me down just a little bit? Something I do want to point out is I think there's this popular sort of subconscious opinion that people have that no one wants to say except at the dinner table, which is that transgender is this new phenomenon. And so today, in particular, I want to be sort of debunking that. And as we saw in the clip, there were portrayals of transgender people from the 70s, the 60s, at the start of the clip. And I think it's important to know that transgender people have always been seen. we haven't been particularly listened to, which is why we see a framework that exists now, such as like talking about pronouns, talking about restrooms, talking about self-identity. However, transgender people have always been seen. Maybe parents just didn't tell people. I also want us to think about, when we think about representation, and as it relates to visibility, how our queer experiences, so gay, bisexual, lesbian, same gender loving experiences and their representations different from transgender experiences and expressions and their representations. So in thinking about how different experiences are represented, something that I have always noticed, and this is of course my own personal opinion, I don't have a source to cite for you all, is that when we think about lesbian experiences in art, in film, television, poetry, novels, the lesbian experiences in particular are always represented as romantic, with a bit of rebellion, and it's sort of seen as sophisticated. And if we think about it, part of the reason why is because of patriarchy, right? How many people know what patriarchy means? Okay, not everyone. Can someone explain what patriarchy is? I know that's a loaded question. I can't answer it myself, but I guess in particular, I would say that patriarchy is, the way that the world is run is always through cisgender white men, partly because of colonialism and also just because the male gaze is what dictates how we're allowed to act, how much money people can make. This is why women make less than men. This is why there are particular roles attributed to the different genders that currently exist, is because of the belief that men are superior. So lesbian experiences in particular can be seen as deviant and immoral, especially in a religious context and in the social culture. But in a previous era, you could have indeed been committed mentally and ostracized from your community. So committed is a term, where your family could have you sent to a mental institution for your behavior. Patriarchal representations have always promoted a sensationalized softness about lesbian experiences in art, poetry, music, and film. When we look at, in particular, gay experiences, particularly gay white men, again, in film, poetry, this like interesting art piece that I don't know what's going on here, but I kind of know. Gay experiences and sort of femininity in particular, when we're thinking about gay experiences, it's sort of it's messaged as, and this is just a half-baked thought that I'm having in front of you, but it's messaged as sort of stripping the manhood away from a man, right? And this is why we say effeminate. Gay people are always perceived as effeminate, even if they are not. Gay experiences are represented with both stigma and sensationalism, deviance, rebellion, immoral, taboo. Those are the terms that we've sort of think of culturally, especially with religion. However, there's also sort of homoeroticism, especially because we can reference Greek and Roman history. That's a whole nother talk for a whole nother day. And then we think about stereotypes. So in media in particular, gay people are always portrayed as the sassy gay friend. Hey, Miss Thing, what's the tea, girl? Y'all can laugh. Or fabulous, sort of this like flamboyant sort of display of freedom. So like a fabulous gay wedding. And then of course, again, when we talk about stigma, we've had, in the gay community in particular, AIDS epidemic, Currently, if you're a person of color, and we think about men's sexual experiences with men, known as down low culture, which has its own stigma, just like Wendy Williams sort of saying that all black men from Atlanta are secretly gay. And then also now, as a modern representation of gay people, there is sort of a spirit of like, oh, the person is a person that just happens to be gay. And when we think about transgender people and representation, someone pointed out earlier that in film in particular, in TV, it's always, transgender women in particular are always portrayed by a cisgender man. As being edgy and provocative and being a true actor in their ability to sort of play a caricature of a trans woman, which has the subconscious undertone that transgender women are a caricature of cisgender women. And so when we think about transgender representations, there's sort of this undercurrent of believing that the person is a freak, is an alien. It doesn't promote empathy with the audience when we think about representation. You don't feel like you actually relate to their experience at the core. Whereas battling your sexuality and navigating that with the broader public feels a little bit different. People can, sexuality is a spectrum, and so I think people in some ways are like, oh, I understand what it's like not to fit in and to be different in some way, and so I'm able to relate to that. But however, I am not able to relate to a transgender person. Transgender experiences are rarely portrayed as romantic or sophisticated in art, film, poetry, and representations of transgender people consistently and historically have promoted sort of a delusion, this idea that you are delusional to believe that you were meant to be a woman or a man, a mental illness, and mocking or mimicking womanhood, manhood. In particular, there's sort of an empathy with trans men in a way that there is not with trans women, and that's because of patriarchy. So if a cisgender person then identifies as transgender and they are female assigned sex at birth and they transition to male, there's sort of an empathy with their experience versus someone being male born and transitioning to the opposite gender. Any questions on that? I realize that that is a slightly half-baked, but if there are any questions, I can take some. Seeing none. This is a statement that I'm going to make for you all, and I realize that right now it may not land in the way that I want it to, but I highly encourage you all to go home and to go back to where you stay and Google transgender and really do some digging on how transgender people are indeed represented. But I would say that transgender people are perhaps the only population in the world that is consistently stripped of both our sanity and our humanity. And before we play this clip, how many people have seen Sex and the City? Not a lot, but a lot. That's cute. So everyone knows who Carrie Bradshaw is? And Samantha Jones. For those who may not know, Sex and the City was a cult classic on HBO featuring 4 very rich, randomly white women in New York City who salaries and houses did not reflect the actual jobs. Carrie Bradshaw writing a column for a small B newspaper in New York and being able to own a brownstone and wear Manolos every day is not usual. However, it was a highly followed show, and I do want to point out that the show also uncovered for American households topics on sex and relationships that was seen as a bit more radical and sort of pushing the envelope for its particular time. With many people in my generation, I'm 29, so many people in my generation and older sort of witnessing the show and and culturally relating to it. I guess now you guys have Fifth Harmony, so that was a joke. But let's play the clip. Any thoughts on that particular clip? It was aired in 2001, just for those who want to know. Thoughts, feelings, anything that comes up? Yes.
That was a homophobic conversation that we saw took place.
Yes. So the statement was that was a pretty homophobic conversation that took place. Any other thoughts? Yes.
That was a bunch of gentrifying white bullshit that she was spouting.
Come through. Gentrifying white bullshit. I really do love that. Yeah. Well, we'll let that clip sit there. But basically, I put that clip in there in particular because I think, again, if we went back to the other slide, I'm so sorry. But if we go back to this slide here, with the National Geographic sort of covering a gender revolution, and with the right wing of the country sort of spewing out that transgender people are just walking into the restrooms and assaulting people, and sort of this interesting gray area that we are in the culture where there are transgender people who are celebrated on red carpets today, and yet we're consistently seeing that transgender people are murdered and facing higher rates of violence against them. Something I want to point out is that conversations on transgender people and their bodies have consistently happened, both in pop culture as well as in urban cities, in literature and propaganda, and yet it never truly comes from transgender people themselves. And so the narratives that are always sort of promoted or have been promoted historically have consistently been sort of put forward to strip transgender people of their humanity. And so in that clip that we saw, it was the description of the pre-op transsexual hookers, half man, half woman, totally annoying, is the narration that we got from Carrie Bradshaw. And Samantha Jones, moving into the meatpacking district, was paying a fortune to live in her neighborhood and was disgusted by witnessing, and again, something that she also said was pseudo-straight men coming from New Jersey to see these women, and sort of both homophobia that was just said and transphobia. I really love this article, actually. This article was written about me and my work, as you can see. It's actually from a right-wing article, and that's how you know you've made it in your career, is if you get, for the straight men in the room, if you get called gay, or for everyone else, if the right wing is coming for you. San Francisco creates a transgender cultural district to empower the gender confused, which I really love the boldness of that headline, which is why I included it. I also included it because it is sort of, I love really thinking about how we as humans have a subconscious that we don't actually talk about. How many people watch the Wendy Williams show? Not a lot of people. Really? Okay. Well, Wendy Williams always talks about what you say publicly and what you say at the kitchen table. And she calls it kitchen table talk, which is the uncensored conversations that you have at home, not on social media. And I always wonder, is this the sort of kitchen table talk that actually happens? Years ago, I worked with a woman in my office who was super supportive of me, at least I thought. And then one day she disclosed that she only called me she and her because she didn't want to get fired, but that she really just saw me as a man. And how often we are in the world where we sort of play along, but sometimes we think differently and that always comes out. And so I included that in there just because I thought it was thought-provoking and sort of foreshadowing of how many people in American culture and cultures around the world think of transgender people. And very limited representations and caricatures of transgender people in popular culture has traditionally silenced transgender people, but it has not rendered us actually invisible. And how many people know who Janet Mock is? Awesome. I highly encourage you to read her book, Redefining Realness. Janet Mock says, sometimes people try to destroy you precisely because they recognize your power. And I think culturally, when we're thinking about the visibility of trans people and the paradox of it, there is sort of a promotion of fear the unknown, quote unquote, and of the power of a small community being able to impact our generation. So again, I am going to be working on debunking popular beliefs. Transgender is a new cultural phenomenon. That is a statement that I've seen online. Apparently it was coined in 2001. I'm just kidding. I'm a little dry today, apparently. But the term transgender was coined in 1971 by Virginia Prince. Prior to the word transgender, we were referred to as transsexual. Its origins dating back to 1949 through Harry Benjamin, who was a German endocrinologist. And he did surgeries on transgender people, specifically male to female. Prior to that, circa 1910, the word transvestite was the sort of general term to describe trans people. By Magnus Hirschfeld. Again, another German. Germans are obsessed with us, I think. Prior to that, the term, Don? Thank you. 1552, it was first put in the Oxford English Dictionary, which means something must have been coming up, especially because cross-dressing and homosexuality were illegal during those times. Also, this book, for those who are wondering, is written by a feminist author, Janice Raymond, who hated transgender people. And so she wrote this book about the transsexual empire, the makings of the she-male, and how transgenders were just taking over the world one by one. I want to go back in history, and in particular, as a Black trans woman, I struggle with history, especially because many of our cultures and traditions as Black people and as transgender people are not documented in a Western sort of framework of what is valuable history and what is historically an asset. Many non-Western cultures, our stories and our information is through oral storytelling traditions. In the Western world, it has to be documented in order for it to have happened. But finally, I did find a couple Black trans folks in history that might surprise you. In 1836 in New York, my spirit sister, Mary Jones, was a sex worker who pickpocketed really wealthy white men in New York City and kept their wallets and their belongings. Those white men were very scared of telling the police because of who and what she was. So they never reported it, which means that she made a killing off of those guys in her work. But one day she was outed, so she pickpocketed the wrong person, and they outed her because they didn't care. And the press labeled her the man monster. That this whole time, unbeknownst to the public, this woman was actually not a woman at all. 1836. And then, fast forward to the 1920s, I love this woman as well, Lucy Hicks Anderson. She was a socialite, actually, and she owned brothels, and she married different men in the military. She had a preference for military men, and then when they would die, she would inherit their benefits. And so what happened was the state of California contested her marriages to the 3 different men that she previously was married to and collecting their military benefits because they said she lied on her marriage application stating that she was a woman when her birth certificate, in fact, stated that she was male. The state of California paid for doctors to go visit her and do a full examination, and they determined that she was born male. And she said, I defy anyone that tells me that I am not a woman because that is how I have lived since I was 4 years old. In the 1950s, Jet magazine, where are my black folks in here? There's a couple, 1, 2. Jet magazine is a black magazine, for those who don't know. Oh, sorry. If we could go, there we go. So Jet magazine played a guessing game in the 1950s. Guess, is she a she or is she really a he? It's very Jerry Springer if you think about it. Again, transgender people in media silently there. And then I think this was Ebony magazine, which is another black magazine, did coverage in 1972 of Justina, who was outed as a trans woman and then fired. And she tried to sue her employer, and at that time, there were no protections for trans people in terms of employment. And Ebony magazine broke the news story in that magazine. Tracy Africa was a international model, and she was up there with Beverly Johnson, which is one of the first black supermodels in the United States. Her face was on a Clairol box, which was probably pretty big. It's probably like being on Vogue. And she was outed by her makeup artist as a trans woman, and she lost everything because of the scandal back at that time. And then Ajita Wilson was a famous international actress and model living in Rome, dating billionaires, famously saying that she never rode a yacht, she only rode vessels. Could you imagine? And she was featured in Jet magazine in 1980. Also, I love to talk about non-Western transgender experiences. My mom is East African, and and my dad is Black American, and I think there's always this assumption that transgender or gay is a white person problem. And I'm always having to debunk that. And so I found different pieces of information. Hijra in India, look it up when you get home. But there's a sacred space for transgender people in India of the Hijra calling in the Hindu faith, Fafafini in Polynesia, eunuchs of East Africa and the Middle East, ladyboys and tomboys in Thailand, Oshun, Orisha of Yoruba, Santeria, and Voodoo culture, particularly in West Africa and the Caribbean, and shamans of Zulu tribes in sub-Saharan Africa. And this is one of my favorites. I wanted to bring them up. And how many people have heard of a eunuch? Oh, great. So if you read the Bible, there's like a little bit of controversy around eunuchs. And Jesus said there were 2 different types of eunuchs, one who chose to be eunuchs and one who were forced to be eunuchs. And they were like, can eunuchs inherit the kingdom of heaven? And Jesus said yes. And then everyone just glosses over that and goes all the way back to Leviticus and says a man shall not lie with another man. And it's like a thing. But anyways, Kislar Aga of the Ottoman Empire was the highest ranking chief underneath the Sultan, and they were a gender variant eunuch. They wore red lipstick, they were male born, and they taught the women how to be women in the harems for the Sultan. That was their job, and they were famous for their gender variance at that time. When we're thinking about visibility, I want us to think critically. Transgender women are consistently seen as mocking womanhood. That's, I think, a fair statement. That's the whole undercurrent around evaluating people being trans. recently a photographer from the Hearst Journalism Awards wanted to follow me on my journey. And in doing the photos, I was receiving an award simultaneously. So I was like, great, sure, follow me around. And I was receiving an award from the mayor, being one of the first Black trans women in San Francisco to receive an award of that honor from the mayor of San Francisco. And the photographer insisted on taking photos of me in the bathroom putting on makeup. And I was like, why? Like, you have an opportunity to showcase me as this economically and socially empowered Black trans woman living in San Francisco, having been homeless and sleeping on the train almost 10 years ago, and now I work in the mayor's office, and you want to take pictures of me, not at my award, but putting on my makeup. And I learned in that moment that there's still this sort of undercurrent of believing that this is all just pretend. And how frustrating it is that many people in the world and in our culture still have an undercurrent belief that trans women are sort of deceiving the masses and moving through the world mimicking and mocking of what they think womanhood is. Facilitating deception. Anyone been on media takeout? No? Shade Room? Okay. So those are hood blogs. TMZ is a more popular one. But whenever trans women are murdered or when trans women out the men that they're dating, it's seen as deception. Oh, he must not have known, because why would he do that? We'll talk about that a little bit more. In feminist culture, transgender women are often othered and consistently messaged as taking up space and or having some sort of residuals of male privilege. And in dating culture, heterosexual men who engage in intimate, romantic, or sexual relationships are stigmatized as gay, increasing the state of violence against transgender women because of our culture and because the broader culture's perception on gay people. How many people can actually see with clarity the text on the screen? Yeah, okay. I'll read it out loud, but this, I don't know who she is, but this BBC coverage of transgender people in this particular feminist says, just because you lop off your and then wear a dress doesn't make you a woman. I've asked my doctor to give me long ears and liver spots, and I'm going to wear a brown coat, but that doesn't turn me into a Cocker Spaniel. How many people have Twitter? There we go. Okay, I'm not crazy. Thank you. Dwight Howard recently was outed for being with several different transgender women, although I believe it was a gay man who outed him. Riddled with transphobia. Twitter, social media, everyone going in on him. Restrooms. When we think about the restroom conversation, first I want to say that folks have been navigating restrooms since the dawn of time. Transgender people have been navigating which restrooms are appropriate. But however, in this country, there was this random creation of who gets to use the bathroom when people had already been sort of deciding that amongst themselves. But it was a propaganda for elections. And it became this big thing where everyone's like, we need gender neutral restrooms. People need to access restrooms. The people most impacted by restrooms realistically are transgender kids who are in schools where their behavior is consistently monitored. Adults have been navigating this since the dawn of time, but it became a propaganda, and this was sort of the messaging behind it, that if we allow the transgenders to use the restroom, then anyone can go into the restroom. Technically, just so y'all know, anyone can go into any restroom if they really wanted to. And no one would say anything. When we see fights happen in public, people don't stop them, they videotape them. Just food for thought. Just more on the stigma of when trans women do out that they are with celebrated men, how controversial it is. When this article in particular came out, the comments that I saw was, he must not have known. And I'm like, you don't think he was doing it on his own volition? But there's this sort of disbelief. However, when someone is outed as gay or down low, people accept that, but they don't accept that people would want to engage or be associated with trans people. I have another one, another video.
30% of transgender people report being fired. 369 transgender women have been murdered last year, the majority of them Black or Latino. Over 2,500 transgender women have been murdered over the last 8 years. Again, keep in mind that we are a small population. Solutions to our disparity are rooted in economic opportunity and social acceptance, destigmatizing the experience of transgender people. Ultimately, I want you all to walk away with accepting the fact that the transgender experience is a human experience. It may not be your experience, but it is an experience of the human condition that transgender people have indeed existed since the dawn of time.
Sorry. That was basically it. Thank you.